we were raised in those days where essentially you go to college, you get a good degree, and you get a job with a large company, and you spend your career with there, right? And we've talked about this before, where the average person now is on a job for 4 years. So that's a length of somebody stays on a job. And as you go into these recessions, I believe you're at even more risk because there's less loyalty today than there was in 2008, 2009. Welcome to Hire Yourself Podcast, a podcast that focuses on business and franchising. We are here to help people realize their dreams and control their own destinies through franchise ownership and business success. This twice-a-week podcast will focus on topics to help you achieve your business goals. Each Monday, we will publish an episode that focuses on a specific idea of franchising or business. And every Thursday will be a less structured conversation on a topic Nat and I think will help you live life on your own terms. All right, Nat, so I thought we'd do something fun today. I don't know if you can call recessions fun, but we're going to talk about franchising and recessions. And one of the things that I find as I'm working with candidates is people are like, well, I don't know, we might have a recession coming up here. I don't know if I should invest in a franchise business. And I certainly want a recession-proof franchise and stuff like that. I'm sure you've never heard of any of that stuff, right?
Yeah, between being really scared about Amazon and recessions, I'm right there with you. I do hear that quite a bit.
Yeah, right. And in recessions, as we know, is just a part of our cyclical cycle. And I think sometimes people forget that because we're on one of the longest economic runs that has ever happened. I was doing a little bit of research preparing for the podcast, and the National Bureau of Economic Research basically said, if you can believe this or not, we've had 33 recessions since the mid 1850s. A recession defined as 2 quarters of economic downturn. So we're going to have another recession. There's no question about it. But it's always funny because everybody's like, well, when do you think it's going to come? And nobody really can predict a recession, right?
Yeah, totally. I know it was interesting. I actually heard that the 2010 to 2000 end of 2019 was the first decade without a recession. So I think people then start to kind of hear footsteps and they kind of are wondering when it's going to happen. I
Or we haven't experienced it. So people start thinking, well, maybe, this is like, I can't, some people in their work careers have never been through a recession, to your point, right?
yeah,
So if you're in your
100%.
early 30s, you probably your first 10 years of your career, you haven't experienced a recession.
Yeah.
And I read something the other day where they talked about recessions are really self-inflicted, right? Recessions are when people start getting kind of bearish on what's happening with the economy and they quit spending money. And I thought that was very interesting. So sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because they're really thinking it's coming and they create it by just tightening up, if you can believe it or not.
So if somebody is researching businesses, do you think that like how would you recommend that they approach doing the research so that they can kind of hedge or manage their downside risk?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is we look at doing our due diligence, right? And we have to do due diligence. And as the person that's going to be investing in the business, it is 100% on you, right? So you can have people that are helping you through the process, but at the end of the day, you're going to be the business owner. You're the one investing your hard-earned dollars, and you have to do your due diligence. So let's kind of start with this idea that when we're looking at doing our due diligence, you want to kind of understand the franchise system, right? The one is that as you're looking at a franchise, because all of them are going to say, hey, we're we're recession resistant. But what I think I start with is at a higher level, the leadership team, are they prepared for the next recession? Have they got plans in place? Because it's going to be a shift. So do they have a plan in place? The other thing that as you're doing your due diligence and investigating a franchise is this idea of the leadership team. Do they have experience taking an organization through an economic downturn? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it does make me feel a little bit comfortable if a franchise has a leadership team that was kind of at the helm in 2008 and 9 and 10, so you can kind of have some data on what that looked like or what that meant on the P&L during that time.
Yeah, and again, as we talk about younger people that are 10 years into the career, well, they haven't had that experience. but that doesn't mean that they can't make it through. So again, understanding what the plan is, how are you going to adjust your business model to make it through that time, because there is no such thing as a recession proof business for sure. One of the things people ask me is, what are recession resistant businesses? And what I tell people is that, first of all, franchising is not, it's not an industry. Franchise businesses compete or conduct business in specific industries. So now when we talk about recession resistant businesses, what kind of businesses do you think about?
I always kind of like the non-sexy type businesses. My background was in senior care, so caregivers that help homebound seniors. Also, I personally like businesses that are more service oriented. So you're not, renting 10,000 square feet and renting it for 10 years. So like if things kind of did go south, you could always scale back a little bit, so you could scale up or scale back. I think childcare is pretty big. Seems like I I was reading somewhere. I think that there's actually more kids between, or maybe it's under the age of 18, than actual baby boomers. So more than the 76 million baby boomers. So there's just a huge tidal wave of demographics for kids, anything to do with kids. So I think that's strong. Healthcare, of course.
So you have the in-home care business, right, where you provide assistance to people in their homes, right? So understanding that there's now more kids than seniors, are you going to add a seniors and kids kid care business? Add an addition to your business?
There probably is a franchise for that, but
But seriously, so from your point, as you look at it, things that are necessities, right? If I need assistance in my home, bottom line is good times, bad times, I've got to have that, right?
yeah,
If it's childcare, if I need childcare, it doesn't matter. I've got to have that childcare from a standpoint, and even healthcare, right? So a lot of those are obvious, and we'll pick things like that, maybe are also not very sexy from a facility-based concept, like car maintenance, right? Irregardless of what happens, if my car breaks down, I have to get it fixed. I have to change the oil. Good times, bad times. Those are important things. So a lot of times it's necessities that we can't put off, and even we'll even go home stuff, like for example, if I have my house floods, right?
yeah.
Restoration business, I've got to have that service. Or if my furnace goes out, I've got to get that fixed. I think it's where you see businesses that are tied to, for example, new home building, right? New home building, we know that probably contracts as the economy contracts from a standpoint. So if you have a business that is tied to 100% of providing services for home builders, well, that's probably a pretty tough business.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think there's also kind of that affordable luxury category too, where Starbucks to some extent has piloted that. Also, I know that there's quite a bit of data, like residential maid service actually fared pretty well through the last recession. You think about companies like Molly Maid and some of these other franchises; they were around. They were started in the early '90s, so they had plenty. They have lots of data to show that that was a pretty strong category. So I do think I like what you said earlier about franchising is a business model, not an industry. So I think it's still like as people are thinking about investing in a business, they need to think about the industry. And I think some industries are just naturally more recessions resistant than others. And then also the other thing is you can always work hard to try to keep your expenses as low as possible. You can sustain if the revenues dip a little bit too.
Yeah. I was listening to a private equity group. They had just invested a couple $100 million into a fitness concept, a boutique fitness concept. And they talked a little bit about their rationale. They said, we know a recession will be coming, but we felt very confident in the research we did that essentially businesses that are tied to health and wellness and beauty stand up pretty well in a recession. And they went on to kind of say, listen, the reason why this is that when we have a recession, people can't control the economy. They can't control if they're going to have that job or that kind of stuff. So they focus on things that make them feel good and they can control. So whether that's working out or that's getting eyelash extensions and stuff like that. They're going to do the things that make them feel good about themselves. I had never thought about that because I always thought, well, fitness, that might be one of the first things that goes. But the rationale made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think that kind of maybe falls under that affordable luxury category, even like getting your hair cut and things like that. I've heard, even in the Great Depression, people were still going and getting a haircut because they wanted
No,
to.
you're giving me a hard time, right? You know I'm
Yeah.
bald, right? So you're just getting me there, right? So all right, fair enough, fair enough. Now, all right. So, as I think about it a little bit, like you see car dealerships, hotels, things like that, or even fancy restaurants, that kind of affordable luxury. Those things I think you start to see to contract. But, most
Yeah.
of the franchises that we place candidates in, they tend to be businesses where they're, in most cases, a need that people have and stuff like that. But it's important to understand again the industry and maybe do a little bit of research of how it's fared against the last recession, which would have been in 2009.
Also, I guess I was just thinking the demographics can play a huge role in things too, right? Because kind of depending on the demographics and what that looks like, average household income, things like that. And I do think it would make a ton of sense, kind of somehow figure out how to go back in that time machine and see what things look like in 2008, 9, 10, 11. And if your geography was one of the, ones that really took it on the chin, and that probably was going to happen, if and when we have our next recession.
Yeah. Well, I think from a standpoint of a franchise business, a lot of these franchises you're looking at have not been through a recession in the past, but you can at least understand the industry and what it's done. To your point, hair care or auto repair and things like that. I like the idea of a franchise, having a franchise business being a little bit more nimble than a large company going through an economic downturn, right? Because you just have the ability to shift a little bit faster. A company like Ford or GM to shift to try to get themselves in a position or get through a tough economic time, they may have a few more resources, but at the end of the day, it's just a bigger ship to turn or to maneuver through that economic downtime.
Yeah, and I guess all things being equal, I'd rather own my own kind of small local business, and then have a little bit more control than being at corporate and being walked out to the parking lot because they decided to cut my job. At least when you own your own business, you feel like you have a little bit more control. um, but that of course comes with different trade-offs.
So let's talk about that, right? Because I always kind of push on that, where people will say, I want to get a job because it's income security, right? And I think I remember the story you're telling me about the gentleman that worked for General Motors, right? Where he was after how many years was it? He was with General Motors. He got walked out.
It was a little over 40 years, and I remember just, how he was completely surprised. Even me, like they walked me out, with the banker's box to the parking lot. It just was crazy.
So I was, as you know, a senior level executive, and going into the last recession and during the last recession, I worked for large companies, and in both cases, they were laying people off. Right, Ford, kind of in advance of the downturn, started laying off, and that's why they offered me an executive package, and I took it. And then later, when I worked for a company called Terex, we had to do headcount reduction, and those are never fun. But the way I look at it is, if you are working for a company, I believe you don't have job security when it goes into a downturn. And to the point you made of the guy that had been with GM for 40 years, right? You never have job security, and so from a standpoint of owning a business, the cool thing, your dad owned his own business, right? My dad owned his own business. If you're the owner of the business, you're the last person standing,
Right. Yeah, that's for sure. You don't usually fire yourself.
right? So I'm under the belief that when you own your own business, you are in control. You have more career and income security than if you work for a large corporation. But we were raised in those days where essentially you go to college, you get a good degree, and you get a job with a large company, and you spend your career with there, right? And we've talked about this before, where the average person now is on a job for 4 years. So that's a length of somebody stays on a job. And as you go into these recessions, I believe you're at even more risk because there's less loyalty today than there was in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, that's totally true. I remember in 2008 and 9, it was actually a pretty good time for franchising because a lot of guys, because they were getting downsized and a lot of them were getting packages, a lot of them actually ended up investing in their own business. So it can actually be kind of not a good time necessarily, but just like sometimes when there are downturns in the economy, like things kind of have to almost like rebirth, or it's like the phoenix and rise again, like reinvent yourself, I guess, if you will. So I think I've seen that happen before
So
in the past.
economic downturn can be really a catalyst for somebody to go invest in a business. Whether they get thrown out on the curb, walked out, and they have to go do something. There aren't a lot of job opportunities because companies are laying off, and so franchising is a way where you can kind of restart and maybe using that severance pay to seed yourself to while you're getting going.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit in America, right? It's like, sometimes you get knocked down, but you get back up. And so whether you're at corporate or whether you own your own business, I think the important thing is to get back up and try to figure things out, solve problems, build relationships, and keep on going. It's just there's opportunity everywhere. I think we should all just be so thankful for how much we're all blessed with, and I'm pretty confident, no matter what comes our way, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of capital out there today, and that makes it easier for people to start businesses. And I think about the last great recession in 2008, 2009, and we kind of had a double whammy, right? We had all the financial institutions were collapsing, and we also had the stock market collapsing, and we had the housing market collapsing. Odds are not all three of those will have the same kind of crash that they did there. So the next recession may not look as severe as the one we went through. Let's hope, right? I mean, we can argue there's other big icebergs out there, whether it's student loan debt or auto loan debt. But for right now, we'll be happy and pretend that those aren't there from the standpoint. So, as you look at the economy and this idea that you're in control when you're your own boss, we can't control the economy, but we can only control our position of where we're at with it. And I think that allows us, instead of being at the whim of a company, you can be in charge and figure out what your next phase is.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. The other thing that I know for sure, that I've learned just as owning my own businesses over the years is it's kind of counterintuitive, but a lot of times, if the economy feels like it's slowing down, my competitors start laying off their salespeople, but that's when I actually like to double down, do more marketing, do more sales, and go capture some market share. So I really do think you can actually turn lemons into lemonade and go, grab some market share if other your competitors are scared about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, they freeze up, and to your point, there's consolidation, right? So you can
Hmm.
pick up other businesses and consolidate in, and I think that's natural evolution, right? Where the strong kind of take over as they go through the tough times. But at least you're in control when you're a business owner. My dad owned a car dealership during the recession in the early '90s, and I don't know if you remember the time, but those were the interest rates were like 18%, which is crazy to think about how high they were. The Fed really threw us into the recession because they increased interest rates so high. But I remember how taxing that was on my dad's business from a cash flow standpoint. It was just killing them from that standpoint. So hopefully we've learned as a country, as a government, to how to position ourselves as we go through these economic downturns.
I Yeah, I love it. I love what you're saying, Pete.
All right. So look, we know we're going to have another recession, Nat, and there's just no question. It's when is it going to be? And what we all can be doing is putting ourselves in a position to weather it. And some people, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, believe that getting a job and riding it through is a way to do it. And I think from our standpoint, we're big believers in that. Hey, listen, if you invest in a business, now is the time to do it. There's capital available. The economy is still good. Get it into that business, get it going. It's probably an easier path than starting the business during a recession. So, if you're looking at doing something, well, now is the time to do it.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to try to be smart about what you're investing in, whether it's the geography where your business is located or the demographics or the people or your customers that you're serving. If you can get something that's growing, then you can kind of just hop on that wave and ride it versus, trying to push a snowball uphill. It's a lot easier, it's a lot more fun to go with some of these natural trends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the hard part sometimes is we look at some of these new franchises that maybe we've never heard of or not really familiar with and go, I wonder how that stands up in a recession. Like I think about axe throwing, right? Axe throwing is a new franchise, right? Where you get to go with your company, you have a company outing, and you go throw axes. It's very interesting to me, and I wonder how something like that holds up during a recession.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of like that risk to reward ratio, right? It's like it's a little bit probably riskier to invest in that business because it hasn't been through a recession, but could potentially be more rewarding if you bet right on it.
Well, I guess if people are pissed off they lost their jobs and they didn't invest in a business, they can go throw axes and take out all their anger from that standpoint.
Exactly. Make
So,
a
Nat,
man cave.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, as we think about this franchising and recessions, we don't know when the next recession is, but I think what we do know is that recession is going to be coming. We do know that if you're gonna investigate a business or do your due diligence, you have to really understand how the franchise company is preparing for that next recession, how the leadership will fare, meaning that they have some experience, and they certainly need to understand the industries that have a higher propensity to weather um, economic downturns, as we talked about earlier, and certainly understanding that as the owner of the business, they are in complete control. And I think that's a very cool thing. And it's a paradigm change, right? Instead of being reliant on a company, you're in control as we go through this next downturn. And to the point you made earlier, there's never been a better time to invest in a business. There's money, there's capital, we're still growing, and might as well get in now, set yourself up so that you are ready for the next storm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think investing, you can never go wrong investing in yourself too. As you were talking, it was just making me remember I was talking to one of my guys that I had worked with a couple of years ago, and um, he was sharing with me how he, invested in his franchise, and then realized, oh man, this is like a little harder than I thought. So he actually invested in himself for like a 12-week sales training course, and he's just like, this has been so amazing to just learn how to be a better salesperson, which then in turn has helped him grow his business. And so I think whether when times are good, we should be investing in ourselves. I think when times are not as good, we should probably be investing in ourselves even more also. So I think
Yeah,
that's another way to kind of protect or hedge against any situation is
yeah,
investing in yourself, and then that way you can be more nimble on your feet and have more confidence too.
yeah. Keep sharpening your saw. You really
Exactly.
need it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That makes a lot of good sense. Well, Nat, it's been a great chat. Oh, again, it'll be very interesting to see when we go into the next recession. There will be one, but hopefully, a lot of people are weathering it through owning their own business.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Hire Yourself podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, give us a rating, and leave a comment on iTunes or wherever you're listening to our podcast. Hire Yourself offers some great resources on our website at hireyourself.com. And if you would like more content regularly, follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook. We look forward to you listening again to help you on your journey of living life on your own terms.